Okay, so our next presenter is Brendan Hussey, who's going to be presenting on modeling the brain action of psychedelics. It's a very interesting talk. Brendan holds a PhD in synthetic biology, a field at the interface of biology and engineering. He has long-standing interest in neuroscience, where he studied his undergrad, with a focus on gene-environment interactions encoded epigenetically. He presented on the promise of psychedelics as a therapeutic tool for a final research project in his undergraduate over a decade ago, and never imagined that so much progress could be made since then. So with that, welcome, Brendan.
All right, I'm going to share my screen and get onto the presentation. Yeah, I mean, if I had known that the research would be happening that's happening now, I might have done a different PhD, to be honest. But what are you going to do? I mean, you make choices, and synthetic biology is really cool too, but psychedelics are really, really interesting. Okay, so you've heard mention of Carhart-Harris. This is the paper with him and Friston, and what they do is they're working towards a unified model of brain action in psychedelics, and they call it REBUS. And this, Friston is a physicist and mathematician. It's a very, very heavy paper in terms of the mental load, but I'm going to break it down into mostly pictures and concepts which are easy to understand. And the general idea behind this whole paper is that you have these abstract mathematical theories for how the brain works, and when you integrate them together in the right way, you can actually test them experimentally. And the cool thing is you can use a psychedelic state as evidence for these theories. Okay, so this is a paragraph from this paper that I find entertaining because they put simply, which I put in italics because I don't think this is simple at all, these closely related perspectives on brain and mind function maintain that the brain instantiates, within its hierarchical architecture, best guess statistical approximations, generative models, of the causes of its sensorium based on Bayesian principles of empirically informed belief updating. Right? That doesn't sound too simple, but what it breaks down to is this. It breaks down to, and the brain runs simulations of reality that best predict what will happen. And what this implies actually is that your conscious experience is this simulation. The second part of that is the brain is hierarchically organized and it physically instantiates this model. And the last part is it uses Bayesian principles. And I'm going to break all these down so it makes sense. Let's start with the model. Okay, so if you take a perceptual neuroscience class, you understand that the brain is a simulation, but this is a surprise for a lot of people. So you might think that, yeah, we have all these different layers in the brain, all these different cortical areas. Maybe we just process it and it comes in as exactly as it is. It's not a model, it's just delayed slightly. But the reality is that it is a model. And so this is a classic illusion. And what it's showing is how much your brain is simulating the experience. So the crazy thing in this is that because of the conical green cylinder casting a shadow, your brain makes B look lighter than A because it's in the shadow. But the reality is they're exactly the same. So I literally did this in Photoshop today. They're exactly the same shade. But your brain, because it has this model of how it should be, says that, well, that's in the shade and it's a lighter square, so we have to make it look lighter, even though they are literally exactly the same color. I guarantee you can try this yourself.
Wow.
So this is your brain imposing its view of reality on you. Like, this is not, you would see it like this, except your brain's like, no, it looks like this, right? So you're running in this simulation, as crazy as that sounds. So the bottom line is your conscious experience is not reality, it's a model created by your brain, and you experience this model, not reality directly. Okay, so let's talk about models more generally. There's a company called Rolls-Royce. You might be familiar with them. They make fancy cars, but the majority of their revenue actually comes from making engines that they sell to the aerospace industry. And they don't charge for the actual engine itself. Like, you don't sell it as like it's a car one-time purchase. What they actually charge is for the running time of the engine. And so what this incentivizes, it incentivizes them to have really, really well-tuned engines with perfect repair cycles, so the engines are never on a downtime. And so what they do is they have these highly predictive models that take sensory input, like sensors from the plane, and then they predict exactly in a computer when certain parts will break down. Then a technician comes in, fixes it. And then what they do is any differences in outcome, let's say they were too early or they were too late, then they'll come back and they'll feed that data in, and that's what's called the prediction error. And we're going to be seeing a lot of prediction error coming up in this presentation. It's going to make more and more sense as this goes on. But this is what a model is. You got a simulation, you have input, you make predictions, and then you have a difference in outcome which you calibrate your model with. And so here, the model is to prevent engine downtime. For the brain, the model is to prevent death. You're a living organism, and the free energy principle actually states that anything that's not just passively degrading into entropy, which we'll cover later, has to be applying the free energy principle. Right? And so this is a model that prevents you from dying. And what happens is instead of sensors, you have senses. They have a simulation, they make predictions, you take actions, and then the same kind of cycle is you send a prediction error back and your model gets better and better. And this keeps you alive better and better. Same kind of idea. right? So just to summarize models, models are a simulation of reality. And there's a specific type of model called a generative model, which makes predictions. So not all models make predictions, generative models make predictions. And the goal is to be as accurate as possible to reduce prediction errors, right? So just brief summary, you have a model, it gets input from the senses, there's an internal stimulation, then there's a control signal, this is your actual action based on the simulation, then you have reality, you interface with that, and then you get a control, and then you get a signal back, the prediction error, how close you were. Okay, so this is a general generative model. What is the REBUS model? Coming back to this sentence again, we've tackled the brain instantiates, a generative model. So we know that the brain is a simulation. Now we're going to tackle hierarchical architecture and Bayesian principles, right? So first we're going to tackle hierarchical architecture, right? So the brain, you may or may not know, is hierarchically organized. What does that mean? It just means there's different levels, there's different layers to the brain. At the very basic layer, there's the somatosensory, there's just your basic senses, sensation, all these things. Then at a slightly higher level, there's gesture, voice, food. Then we go up drawing, passive viewing, memory, math, and then reasoning at the highest level. These are increasing layers of abstraction, okay? And the really neat thing is the brain actually encodes these spatially, like in a physical map of the brain, right? So if we look at this chart here, we see that in the dark red, we have the more basic motor functions, and then we go up in complexity as we get lighter and lighter. So here this is the motor cortex, and as we move forward to the frontal areas of the brain, they become more and more abstract. Same thing with the temporal and parietal lobes, right? Along the borders, you have the more baseline stuff, but as you get higher and higher up, it gets into the more temporal regions. And the interesting thing is this actually maps almost exactly the distribution of the receptor for psychedelics, which is a 5-HT2A receptor, right? I'm not going to get into the pharmacology in this talk, that can come in the next talk, but there's a perfect overlap in these regions and then the effects of psychedelics. So the brain not only is organized abstractly, hierarchically, but it's also organized physically in a hierarchical organization, right? And this is what I showed before in this image here. Here you have an image coming to the retina, it goes to the LGN, and it goes through this whole pathway of processing, right? This is the hierarchical architecture instantiated in a physical level, all right? And what happens here in more detail is you take some basic input, which are just colors and lines, they become more structured, and then you form letters, which then become words, which then become concepts, which becomes ideas, et cetera, et cetera. They go through different processing and getting increased abstraction as it goes. So what happens when we combine these two things? We have a generative model, this makes predictions, and we also have this cortical hierarchy. When we put them together, we get what's called hierarchical predictive coding. This is such a pervasive theory in neuroscience, it's almost presumed to be true, kind of like evolution at this point. It's not quite at that level, but all the talks and papers I read, people refer to it as having so much evidence that it's the dominant theory right now. Let's dive into a little bit more detail about what this is. So here we have some hierarchies. Here's one level, here's another level, here's another level, here's another level. We're going to go through these arrows and stuff a little bit more in detail. What we need to focus on right now is that these different levels here are the same as these different levels here in the visual cortex. And we have a generative model, and this generative model kind of fits in at each step. So there's generative models of different layers at every single step. So it's not like there's one big generative model. There's actually a generative model in each layer of the hierarchy, all right? This is what hierarchical predictive coding is about. Layers of hierarchy of general models, all right? And what you'll notice is you took a look at the paper is this hierarchical predictive coding image right here. If we just flip it on its side, this is actually figure 1 from the paper. This is a hierarchical predictive coding map. Here you have sensory input, bottom-up prediction errors, top-down predictions, going like this, back and forth, same kind of interactions. That's what they're getting at in this image. But you might be wondering, what is going on over here? What is this free energy landscape and alpha rhythms about? I'm just taking a drink. What is that about? That's what we're gonna get to next. But to explain this, we need to get into the Bayesian math. So we have generative models, we have hierarchical architecture. What is the Bayesian principles about? And I know you might be seeing the word math and that might be a bit scary. And you might think, can't we just ignore the math for this talk? Math is scary. But I'm gonna read this sentence and walk through it, okay? The present work proposes that a principal action of classic psychedelics is to relax the precision weighting of prior beliefs encoded in the spontaneous activity of neuronal hierarchies. Okay, so we know what a neuronal hierarchy is, but what is a prior belief? And what does it have to do with relaxed precision weighting, right? And so the answer is, no, we can't ignore the math, but we're actually not gonna do any equations. It's not gonna be complicated. We're gonna be looking at graphical math and Bayesian probability, and I promise it'll all make sense. Okay, so let's talk about beliefs, all right? You might have a simple example where you flip a coin. You know that it's either gonna be heads or tails. And so that's a relatively simple outcome, but in a lot of interactions, it can be a lot more complicated than that. Let's take, for example, this image on the left, okay? This says a prior, all right? And we can consider this to be our expectation, all right? This is a distribution of expectation. Let's say on this axis, we're interested in some kind of anxiety parameter, okay? So let's say on the right, we feel anxious. On the left, sorry, this is a negative interaction on the left and a positive on the right, sorry, my right, and a positive interaction on the left, all right? So what we're saying here is because we're shifted more to the right, we're saying we believe that this interaction is going to go more negative. We're not super confident. It's not like a super sharp peak. It's distributed, but we feel like it's going to go more negatively, right? So the height is felt confidence, and this width here is the range of expectation. Obviously, the more confident you are, the more narrow your expectation is. Here, we're saying, you know what, I think it will go poorly. I'm not super confident, but I think this interaction will go poorly. Then what we have is we have what's called the likelihood. This is the external event itself. This is not your perception. This is the actual external event itself, taken in through your senses. Okay, and this is also a distribution. You don't know exactly for sure what happens. It's always a distribution as well. And so what this says is because it's shifted more to the left, and it has a higher peak, we say we're quite actually confident. If we just could perceive it directly, we'd be confident that it went actually better than okay. This is to the left of the center line. It went actually okay. And when we multiply these two things together, we get what's called a posterior. And this is actually what you experience. So what you experience is it went okay. It's actually pretty much right in the middle. Your expectation was it wasn't going to go good. Actually what happened was it was okay. But in the middle, it's a multiplication of the two. And this is called Bayes' theorem. This is actually how all sorts of complicated methods, and this is how AI works. It's actually the best predictor statistically of what will happen in any situation. And what's profound here is that your experience is not directly what happens. Your experience is heavily biased by this prior, by your expectation. You can never experience reality directly because you're always biased by the very hardware, which is your brain that you run it on. This is a crazy thought. So let's dive into this a little bit more detail. This is a new figure, but it's the same as the other one, except it's all compacted, all right? So you have your prior, which is what you believe. This is your expectation. And then you also have your prediction error, okay? Then again, remember I talked about this in the generative models. You send back a prediction error, your brain does the same thing. This is reality, this blue line here. This is what you experience, the green. But what's important here is the prediction error, which is the expectation minus the reality, all right? This is a meme from Reddit about expectation versus reality. You know, that you have this burrito, you set a pretty sharp expectation. That looks really good, I'm gonna buy that, it's delicious. And then you get a reality, that is very sad looking burrito. You have a pretty large prediction error here, all right? This happens all the time in life, and your brain tries to learn from this. So remember, prediction errors, right? This is hierarchical predictive coding. Boom, there's the prediction errors. So now we're starting to understand what these arrows are about, okay? So from every level, you're sending to the next level up the prediction error. And furthermore, what you're sending down are the priors, okay? So on this side, you're sending down predictions to each other layer, which is these priors here, and what you send up are the prediction errors, okay? So we're starting to understand what predictive coding is more and more. And what it says here, again, the present work proposes that a principal action of classic psychedelics is to relax the precision weighting of prior beliefs. So what does that mean? What are you talking about relaxing the precision weighting of the priors? We're doing something to these priors. Okay, this is the same sentence. Let's talk about how powerful priors are to affecting the outcome, what you actually believe, the posterior. In a weak prior, you can see here this dashed gray line. It's very flat. This is very low confidence. You don't have a strong belief about what's going to happen, okay? Right? And then your likelihood, which is the event itself, it actually was very strongly biased in this direction. So let's say this was a negative interaction. You had a very negative interaction. You had a very low expectation of what was going to happen. In terms of confidence, you didn't know what was going to happen. You have a large change. So this is a large prediction error you're sending back. And you can see that your posterior, what you experience, is very close to the likelihood because your expectation is very small. But if you have a strong prior, you don't change very much at all. This is the reality. This red line is what actually happened. And look, your expectation was so strong that you barely budged in what your reality actually experienced. This is just as dramatic. That's how strong the effect of priors is. And so this is a GIF from the same site as before that shows how priors change with expectation, okay? So I'm gonna play it a couple times so you can follow it. The prior is this gray line here. So it's very, very heavily biased, let's say in the negative direction, okay? And the likelihood is this red line in the middle. And what we're gonna watch is we're gonna watch this blue line. This is the experience change with iterations, okay? So it's going through a number of what they call flips, right? You can just think about this experiences, right? Like let's say you're trying to learn. You have an expectation something's gonna go very badly. You keep exposing yourself and it keeps being neutral in the middle red, and you see how your experience shifts over time, okay? Oops, okay. So there we go. It gets closer and closer and closer to reality with more experience, right? So I'm gonna play that again. We're starting off close to this side, and then and then your actual experience connects more and more and more with the evidence, which is red, right? That's the actual experience. So that is how you can update your beliefs over time with experience, even overcoming a strong prior. But look how many iterations it takes. That's the effect of a strong prior. Okay, so now we can understand the first sentence here. We know the brain instantiates a hierarchical model, it's a generative model, and it uses Bayesian principles. Can we put this all together? Putting it all together gives us the Bayesian brain, okay? So this is the same visual example I gave before. Inside the brain here, we have Bayesian predictions. How does this work? So here's reality, okay? Reality is we start off with our prior. What do we expect will happen? This goes through, and this reality, this likelihood, interacts with our prior, and at every single level, it interfaces. So this level passes it up, this level passes it up, this level passes it up. So every single level of processing, your priors are there. So at every single level, you're biased because your incoming thing has to deal with the prior at every single level, and then you get your outcome, all right? So it's not even are you biased by one Bayesian input, you're biased at every single level of your processing. Let's look at this again. This is in more detail. We're coming back to here again, all right? So each level here has an instantiation of the Bayesian model, okay? Right, so you have your predictions, sends down the predictions, which are the priors, and we send back the prediction errors, which are the differences. So you might say, well, this is a really cool hypothesis, but is there actually any proof that this is what is happening? And the answer is there is, but the problem is that the predictions are general enough that other theories can explain them. And so what the REBUS model does is it brings in the free energy and entropic principles to actually test these empirically and validate this theory. So the sentence says, crucially, both the free energy and entropic brain formulations rest on quantifiable measures from information theory that are apt for empirical study. So when you connect the Bayesian brain with free energy and entropic brain, you can actually test these predictions of this whole hierarchical theory, which is incredibly powerful. So let's look at the REBUS model as a whole. Okay, let's say this is the REBUS model. We have Bayes' theorem, which we've talked about. That's those priors and likelihoods and outcomes. We have hierarchical predictive coding, and together they make up the Bayesian brain, okay? Then we have the free energy principle. The free energy principle encompasses the Bayesian brain while also overlapping with the entropic theory. And the entropic theory's power is that it can make measurable predictions. And what ties the free energy principle and entropic theory together is information theory. We're not going to delve on the information theory too much, just trust that very, very smart people who understand math well can do these things, and it's very cool. And the great thing about these measurable predictions is we can actually use the effect of psychedelics to test them. So this is how I envision the REBUS model. And the power of this is we can take abstract and fine scale mechanisms, mathematics and abstract principles, and we can turn them into large scale mechanisms that are easier to measure. So we can connect the dots between this Bayesian brain, this abstract, presumably very powerful theory, and how the brain actually works. So far, we've covered the Bayesian brain. Now you might be thinking, wow, this is going to be an extremely long talk if we have to go through everything in that kind of detail. Don't worry, it's not going to be that long. We're going to just gloss over the free energy principle because it's mostly math. The entropic theory adds a bit of visualization, and then we're going to jump into the effects. So let's tackle the free energy principle. The free energy principle is just a principle that states mathematically how adaptive systems reduce the natural tendency to disorder. So what this says is this is just a control system for how these systems resist decay. So homeostasis is this property of living things that maintains a certain internal state despite external fluctuations. And what free energy principle states is that any system that essentially doesn't just disintegrate or degrade in the environment, that maintains a certain state, follows the free energy principle, which is reducing prediction errors in a model. Anything that does this contains a model, and that model reduces prediction errors. And you might recall this kind of graphic looks very similar to the generative model graphic that I showed before because they're largely the same. So how does this interface with this hierarchical architecture? Essentially, the free energy principle is just fancy math that says how these prediction errors reduce the errors at every single level. Right? So because passing a prediction error and then somehow magically optimizing your outcome is very abstract. But to reassure you, very, very smart people who understand the math can say, this is precisely how you do it, right? Not any old way will work. You have to have the right formulation for how to do this, and that is where the free energy principle comes in. Okay, so that's the free energy principle. That's all we're going to dive into that. Now, the free energy principle overlaps with entropic theory because of information theory. And information theory, we're going to gloss over, but it's the same kind of math that allows the free energy principle to work and overlaps with the entropic theory. Okay, what is the entropic brain hypothesis? The entropic brain hypothesis proposes that the entropy of spontaneous brain activity indexes the richness, that is the diversity and vividness of subjective experience within any given state of consciousness. So what this means is that if you could measure brain entropy, you can measure subjective experience, not the precise subjective experience, but the diversity and vividness of it, okay? But you might be wondering, what is brain entropy? What does that even mean? We've seen this figure before in this very journal club lecture, right? This is what happens on psilocybin. This is what happens in a normal state. You can see that this state looks more orderly. as said before, I think by Paul, is that these regions, the colored regions, mostly interact within themselves, and there are some interactions between them as well, but it's mostly within themselves, and it looks much more orderly. This looks like chaos. This looks like disorder. Entropy is a measure of disorder or uncertainty. So this is a low entropy state. This is a high entropy state. And so you can measure these in the brain in various ways. You can measure it with EEG, you can measure it with MEG, you can measure it with fMRI, et cetera. There's lots of different ways to measure brain entropy. And here's an example from mindfulness meditation, okay? So red means high entropy, blue means low entropy on a relative scale. And so you can see that at rest in a normal person, it's relatively high entropy. But then with mindfulness-based stress reduction, the yellow is less entropy and the blue is even less entropy than here. And if you subtract them, you have a lower entropy state. So with mindfulness-based stress reduction, that's an example of how you can use brain entropy to measure the effects of the experience, the diversity and vividness of experience. You don't know exactly what's happening, but you can say that the experience is becoming more organized. Okay, and you'll also notice that this kind of looks like a topographical map. And there's a reason behind this. These are like topographical maps because the high energy equals hills, and the low energy, the low entropy equals valleys, just in the same way that on a hill at the very top, that's a high entropy state because it can roll down in any direction, whereas in a valley, if it's stuck, it can't go anywhere. That's a low entropy state. And this ties in with energy landscapes as a whole to describing brain activity, okay? So these little local states, little local terrains can represent small parts of a larger terrain, just like a city inside of a country, all right? And what the free energy principle states is that the brain wants to be in a low energy state over the long term. So the optimization of that model, that hierarchical predictive coding, sending back those prediction errors, that optimization is designed to put your brain in a long-term low entropy state because that is the most stable and predictable. But the problem is, let's say you started here and you roll down the hill, this one's actually lower, but what if you roll down this side because of life experience or by accident or whatever? The problem with that is that you can get stuck in what's called a local minima. And once you're stuck in here, you can't really get out. There's a lot of energy required to get out. So how can you get into a more optimal brain state? You could think of this as like a heightened anxiety state or depression or some kind of trauma. You were meant to go here, but you got stuck here instead and you can't get out. How can you get out of it? You could get energy to boost yourself out, or you could flatten the energy landscape itself. And so this is an example. If we go back here, we can see this is pretty hilly and mountainous relatively to these, which is very flat. It looks like a plane with a couple of little potholes in it. And what can happen here is when you flatten the energy landscape, you can actually move around a lot more. You can just kind of cruise between these different brain states and peruse them and really get a sense of what is out there in your possibilities of experiencing rather than being stuck in one experience. And you'll notice this is exactly what the rest of this figure is about. Here's the free energy landscape. You see in a normal state, you're in a very deep valley, and so you can be stuck in local minima, whereas on psychedelics, you flatten the energy landscape, and so you're more able to experience other landscapes and possibly find ways out of your experience, your anxiety, trauma, depression, whatever would happen to be. So that is the effect of psychedelics, and that is the REBUS model. So now, how does this all tie together? And this is where it gets really interesting. This is the consequences of hierarchical predictive coding are the following. It follows that the predictive coding that precise high-level priors, so having priors that are very strong, ordinarily have an important constraining influence on the rest of the hierarchy, canalizing lower components and inhibiting their expression or influence. To translate, if you have, let's say you have anxiety, you have a belief state, a high-level state that people don't like me. I'm an anxious person, people don't like me, that's why I'm anxious, right? What that does is it suppresses all the way down through strong priors your experience, so that what you experience is something like, yeah, people don't like me, even though that's not actually what might be happening. And this is incredible. There are so many examples of these kind of biases. We see them all the time. We live in an age where extremely strong biases are causing political issues, all sorts of things. There's no end to them. And what is fascinating here is this is literally confirmation biased, manifest at the biophysical level. Our brains are hardwired to minimize prediction errors, making us very, very strict in what we expect and what we want to happen. So it's very clear why we get stuck in different mental states. And this is how strong the power of priors are. So this is a weak prior. A weak prior, as we saw before, is flat, and we can allow us to change our mind. We can get a big prediction error. But if we have a strong prior, we can't change our mind very easily. This strong prior inhibits the expression of the whole hierarchy, and this is how it works. All right? So let's say we have a strong prior. This is our dominant mental state. That imposes a strong prior on the level below it, and then on the level below that. And then a strong prior is imposed all the way down so that your very senses, the level of the sensory input, has a strong prior imposed on it, which means you can't vary very much. So your prediction error, and so if someone says, hey, you did a really good job on something, you worked really hard, you know, your model is so strong, you can only shift so much you suppress the lower level and you send back very little feedback. And so what ends up happening is you have a very small change. You could have a very large input, but because your prior is so small, you can't really change your mind. And you say, I did a terrible job and I should have worked harder. This is what it's like being in an energy landscape with deep holes. You can get stuck in local minima and you can't get out. Now, what happens if we try to unbias the brain? This is what they say. Relaxing high-level priors or beliefs under psychedelics is that the ascending prediction errors from lower levels of the system that are ordinarily unable to update beliefs to the top-down suppressive influence of heavily weighted priors can find freer register in the conscious experience by reaching and impressing upon higher levels of the hierarchy. So let's translate that. Here's our high-level prior. We take psychedelics, we flatten that prior, and then we have a much lower signal that suppresses the prior below it. And then we propagate this lower prior all the way down the hierarchy. This is what happens. And then we open up our senses. Oh, you did a really good job. And then what happens? We can send back a big prediction error because guess what? We can shift that posterior distribution now. And we get a big change. So then instead of being locked into, oh no, I'm anxious, I'm bad, people don't like me, you say, I did a great job, my hard work paid off. You get a much more direct understanding of what happens because you allow that big change because you've reduced the prior. Then your energy landscape flattens. You're able to move around, you're able to enter new states of thinking, a new way of being. So now we can fully understand figure one. We're not looking at the algorithms, but we don't have to worry about that right now. But now we can understand what happens. We have our hierarchical predictive coding and our steep energy landscape, and we can flatten it and we can move around. We can experience new states of being. This is a strong prior, that's a weak prior. We relax our priors. So this is the REBUS model. This is the predominant background theory behind this, and we can understand it more fully now. So the funny part is that is just the introduction to the paper. That's the first couple of pages. These are the remaining sections. I'm not going to cover these now. A lot of them have to do with evidence behind this theory, and there's quite a bit. But the really interesting section is psychedelics and insight. And so just to end off, remember this figure, hierarchies, energy landscapes, being able to move around, more freedom of thought. And next time, if you're interested, I'm going to be exploring what a sand pile, what heating up iron, and what changing your mind with criticality and insights mean on psychedelics. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, Brendan, thank you so much for doing that. Thanks for taking on a really difficult article and really bringing it to a level, well, the introduction of a very difficult article, and bring it to a level that everyone can understand. I think before we jump into the questions, there's a lot of love coming into the comments. We have someone joining from London, England, and they're saying it's 2:15 a.m. and my mind is blown, can't sleep, loving this presentation to bits. A lot of comments about how this presentation is mind-blowing. So thanks a lot for taking the time to summarize something so difficult for us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah. Just jumping in to the first question here. Apologize if I pronounce your name wrong, Tejas. Does this model suggest why anxious/challenging psychedelic experiences are still often correlated with positive long-term outcomes?
Yeah, so I was actually watching Carhart Harris on a bunch of YouTube talks today to make sure I was getting his stuff right. And yeah, that's the really interesting part is it doesn't actually matter, like the valence, the positivity or negative of your experience doesn't actually matter as much as the intensity of it. And so it seems like, yeah, you can have a very intense negative experience on psychedelics, but because you flattened your landscape, you can roam around that more. And so the idea is like if you heat up a hot piece of iron and then you let it cool, you can morph it as it's cooling. And so maybe you have a very anxious experience, but you're going to explore why you're anxious and all these different events in your life. And you're going to put it together so that when that cools, you can kind of if not reform the energy landscape, maybe land in a more local minima that's closer to the optimal minima. And so, yeah, I think that's the understanding of why. I mean, that's the theory. This is all theory at this point, but that's the closest theory that they have so far that I understand.
Okay, awesome. Just moving on to the second question. Can this model account for long-term changes after taking a psychedelic in terms of changing your priors?
Absolutely, yeah. And they're really trying hard to find a way to measure priors, actually measure priors in the brain before and after. And I believe that there's some early evidence for this, and it has to do with being able to measure the connectivity patterns in your brain. So I'm not gonna get this right because I haven't read these papers recently enough, but you'll have to take my word for it that they're working towards measuring these priors. And what this means is that, yeah, you can end up in a lower minima or lower the minima yourself through this process. And the idea is that, yeah, we, as mentioned in the previous talk, you can get more openness, more trait openness, and like the big 5 personality traits, right? That's a permanent change. Changing your personality is a dramatic effect. Like personalities, you learn this in Psychology 101, they don't change over your life. You can predict it at like age 5 and it's like 90% correlated with the rest of your life. These things do not change. And so that you can get a difference in openness to psychedelics really shows you the power of being able to go into your brain and essentially redo your childhood plasticity over again and land in a different area. I think, and then there's going to be increasing evidence for that. And this is still in its early days, but that's where it seems to be going.
Okay, moving on to the third question here. To what degree do you think dosage correlates with the degree of prior weight suppression?
Yeah, so dosage seems to be incredibly important. Let me see if I can bring up a slide. I don't know if I do have a slide on this or not. No, I don't think I do have a slide on this. Yeah, I was just watching Carhart Harris talk about the dosage. So what they see is dosage is incredibly important because people have a lot of psychological barriers. Like you can be, can you guys still see my slides right now?
Yeah, we can still see them.
Okay, let's go. I can go to this one then. People can be in a pretty deep prior. This is actually from another paper. You can be in a pretty deep prior. Actually, this isn't as good. I'm just going to go back. Sorry. If you're stuck in a pretty deep prior, so let's say you have major depression, right? What's happened in your major depression, in theory, is that you have so much feedback inhibition on your state, you literally can't have a positive experience. You can't experience any positivity because you're locked into such a deep, like imagine this hole here being like a black hole. Like there's just nothing you can do to get out of it. There's no amount of positivity you can receive. There's no amount of SSRIs. You know, you have these people that have treatment-resistant depression. That's where they are. And then what psychedelics do is they flatten the landscape, but it's flattened in proportion to receptor occupancy. So I was going to get into this next time, but you know, there's a certain receptor that psychedelics bind to, and you have the more you saturate this receptor, and they've done studies on this, the more you have this entropic thing happening, and then the more flattening of the energy landscape. So if you're in a really, really deep hole, you're going to need more psilocybin to get you out of it. You need to flatten that landscape even more. So it absolutely does have to do with dose. And when I read this paper, I was excited to think about, you know, in the future, you could actually do brain scans on people before, figure out what their energy landscape is, and actually give them a dose tailored to the depth of their landscape that they're in, possibly. I don't know the math behind it well enough, but that's what has occurred to me. So you might actually get precision dosing based on your energy landscape going into a study or therapy.
Mm-hmm. So another question here. Couldn't you argue that some effects of psychedelics, for example, hallucinations, which by definition are things that aren't reality, are the product of stronger priors than normal?
Could you argue that they are the product of stronger priors? Yeah, so I mean, one interesting thing to note here is that your visual cortex is at the back, and you can see that has a very high expression of the 5-HT receptors. And so, and you'll notice that in this visual pathway here, that's exactly the process of visual information. You can see that it tracks this red zone very, very closely, right? And so hallucinations are especially prominent with psychedelics because of the receptor occupancy in this area. Now, them having to do with priors, I mean, I don't know, do you see what you expect to see? I don't know if that is true. I mean, often it's like geometric things. I mean, people have entity contacts and things like that. I don't know. If you're a Christian, do you see God? If you're a Buddha, do you see Buddhist? I don't actually know the answer to
that. There's a question here specific to the REBUS model. So does the REBUS model address endogenous mechanisms of prior manipulation?
Sorry, does it address
endogenous mechanisms? So things that are not coming from psychedelics, but are actually activated just kind of within your own mind without taking anything.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea is that in your normal state of being, you have this very top-down. Where's that slide? You have this very top-down framework for controlling your experience, right? If we go back to here again, your endogenous mechanism. So what the free energy principle states, which I didn't say explicitly, is that you want to have the smallest prediction error possible at each step. And so what this does is it means that you actually seek out and perceive experiences that are in line with having the smallest change possible. So you set up your life so that you're not surprised. So like surprise is actually inverse certainty, right? In a mathematical sense. And so, you know, you want having a small prediction error means having high certainty. So you can like, it's profound to think about that you go through your life trying to minimize your surprise, which means that you're actually becoming more and more biased because that's the free energy principle. You want to be able to have as easy homeostasis as you can. So like, yeah, your endogenous state is to have minimal surprise. But the problem with that is that you can, if you don't have strong selective pressure, like in our society we live in, there's very, like in a Western world, it's very, very safe. There's not extreme events that cause you to have to change your priors very much at all, right? You can kind of just survive along for as long as you can. And so it's very easy to become biased. There's nothing forcing you to change your mind. Whereas back in the day, you had survival level events all the time. And so I think that's the problem with, I mean, this is more philosophical now, but I think that's where psychedelics can come in, is because you can easily in your common everyday life get stuck in your local minima because there's no reason for you to change. Everything's so safe. You know, you can get along with erroneous beliefs without any consequence.
Okay. We're just going to take a couple more questions here because we're running a little low on time. So we're going to go here. This is the first time I'm hearing about energy minimas in psychology. Is there research on links between energy minima maxima and psychopathologies?
Yeah, so this is interesting. This figure right here is actually from autism. And so what it's showing is that, interestingly, people who are autistic seem to have already flattened landscapes. But the problem with an already flattened landscape is that a lot of tasks require you to have high certainty, right? So if you're trying to execute, like driving a car, you need to be very high certainty. You press the gas pedal, you go forward. When you press the brake, you stop. You have to have high certainty that the lights work in this way and this car's going to turn, this car's not going to turn. And so most of life requires you to have high certainty in order to execute functions in a high capacity. Right? And so if you're constantly in a low minima state where you can just move around between different brain states very, very easily, it's very hard to function. And so what they found in this study, in this figure, was that in people who do not have autism, the IQ is correlated with how easily you can switch states. So it's called task switching. You know, it's kind of like working memory. You know, can you switch tasks from this to this? How quickly can you do it? That indexes IQ for people who do not have autism. For people who have autism, it's actually how well can they stay in a state, because they have problems staying in a state because their energy landscape is so flat. And so their ability to stay in a state is actually indexed with their intelligence, the opposite of what it is if you don't have autism. And so I think this has been expanded to other areas as well. I mean, it seems obvious that maybe could this be happening in schizophrenia in maybe a different system or in a different way. You know, depression. I mean, that wouldn't surprise me at all, but I'm not an expert on that whole area of literature.
Okay. I think we might wrap it up there because we're getting really close to 9:30. So yeah, if anyone's interested in kind of hearing the rest of this presentation, Brendan's actually going to be coming to the MAPS Journal Club next month to kind of finish off and summarize the rest of this article for you guys. But again, thank you so much, Brendan. You blew a lot of minds today, even across the Atlantic Ocean, apparently. So thanks again for taking on such a difficult article for us. Really appreciate that. And I'm just going to pass off to Leo really quickly, just to kind of finish it off and give our closing remarks.
Thanks again.